So last time we talked about the populist, which are basically the movement is a farmers' revolt and an independent third political party. We are moving into chapter 23, back on schedule here, and now talking about the progressives. Definition of progressive is a little unclear even to historian. It is related to progressive ideas, but that doesn't help using a definition in its definition. Basically, the dictionary definition is related to progress. And this is a little tricky because everybody's in favor of progress. Nobody is anti-progressive. But this is a wide umbrella. It takes in a lot of different elements. The definition in the dictionary is supporting or enacting social reform or new liberal ideas, policies, methods, favoring progress, change, improvement, or reform, as opposed to wanting to keep things as they are. That doesn't help because it uses progress in the definition. Okay, so I would use instead for this period change. And what kind of change? Forward change. What makes it forward? Change using government action on some level. Improvement using government. And this is pretty much still the definition of progress. And nobody is against progress. Maybe sometimes we should be, I don't know. In this period, you are talking about all kinds of progressive movements. You're talking about child labor laws, city zoning laws, antitrust laws, food and drug laws, wildlife conservation laws, prohibition of alcohol, the vote for women. All of these are progressive movements. The key factor, and this came from a student actually in class once, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. Populists, of course, are working to help themselves. Farmers organize to help farmers. Progressives are organized to help others, and it's a crucial difference there. So I'm working with slide number 12, and again, the who, what, when, where I think is the easiest way to do it. So what period are we talking about? The populists die out by 1900. The progressives begin to boom about 1900, and they end pretty much at the end of World War I by the early 1920s. So again, this is a very short but intense and widespread movement in America. The Muckrakers really are before them sometimes, but the whole thing kind of slows down in the early 1920s. Unlike rural farmers in the South and West, progressives are urban people. They are in eastern and midwestern cities. That's where the cities are. They are very different types of people. These are upper middle class or wealthy people, well-educated. 90% of the people involved in progressive movements had college degrees, and this is at a time when most people don't have college degrees. Half of them had graduate hours, not only a college degree, but post-college. Often religious motives. 88% of them are active in their church. They are what we would call WASP, W-A-S-P, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So the churches they're involved in are not the Catholic and the Jewish synagogues, but these are Protestant churches. This again becomes an interesting factor. Clearly, these are people who are practicing the gospel of wealth, or a social gospel, as they talked about it. I'm in a good position. I have the time, the energy, and the money to turn around and help those who need help. Ministers would preach to their parishioners to get involved with social problems. The problems they're getting involved with, they could look around and see all kinds of issues that needed help. So this is a movement to make America great again, to correct the problems in America. We laugh at them today and think they're a little naive. They actually thought they could fix most of these problems. And we laugh today and said, no, you can't fix a lot of them. But they worked hard to do that. Many people today are also doing the same. So the problems they're looking at, you have massive corruption politically and economically. You have terrible conditions, living and working conditions for the poor, particularly in cities, but also in rural areas too. We forget about that. any place you look, there were problems. There were problems with alcohol. There were problems for women. There were problems in nature, in forests. There were problems with food and drugs. There were problems with city zoning. Anything you wanted to talk about, there were problems that needed to be fixed. And these people actually rolled up their sleeves and began to tackle it. There's two different groups of progressives. You can break them down into two categories, basically. Progressives were either muckrakers or involved in progressive movements. Okay, so the muckrakers are the point men on the spear. They are the first. Muckrakers expose the problems. Progressives fix the problems once they're exposed. So muckrakers, the term came from, actually Teddy Roosevelt called them muckrakers. Now, if you know what muck is, if you've ever been on a farm, muck is the stuff that has to be shoveled out of stalls in a barn. Okay, it is manure, it is old hay, it is dirt, it is the goop on the bottom of a barn. So muckrakers are basically raking up the dirty underside of society. That's where the term came from, and it was Teddy Roosevelt's. We have them today. They're very prominent. You know a number of them. We call them today investigative journalists, but they do exactly the same thing. They expose the problems. Anderson Cooper, 60 Minutes, a lot of different podcasts do this. They are looking for the problems. You've already seen one of them. Jacob Riis, with his photographs of the New York City ghettos, was a very early muckraker. He actually started in the 1880s, although most of them are not really until after 1900. And all of them used, how do you expose the problems? They publish their findings. A lot of these are magazines, inexpensive magazines or journals. Now, who is going to buy a magazine? Dirt poor factory workers? No. Number two, a lot of them didn't read English. So these are people writing for largely a middle class and upper middle class audience. These are the people who can do something about it. These are the people who will also vote. The non-literate and the non-English speaking and the extreme poor cannot afford it and cannot read it. So muckrakers don't solve problems, they expose problems. Problem with working day in and day out with horrible conditions and horrible situations is they became often cynical. They got burned out. This still happens, of course, with investigative journalists today. I have a daughter-in-law who is an investigative journalist, and some of the assignments she has been given, one of her stories was to attend an execution in a prison, which was pretty traumatic. But this is what journalists do. They tell us the truth about unpleasant things. Once the problem is exposed, they work to pass laws to fix it. How are you going to fix the problem of these things? You are going to change the laws and try to come up with solutions. So muckrakers may be pessimistic, but progressives in general are fairly optimistic that these are problems that can be solved. At least they believed that at the time. They are also, the third P on that list, pragmatic. What does pragmatic mean? Another P word, practical, a workable solution. They are the opposite of idealist. A pragmatist is looking for whatever works, is the easiest definition of it. So they're not looking for some great solution to something. It's like, how can we solve this immediate problem here in Boston or Philadelphia or New York? This is clearly not the social Darwinist theory. This is absolutely the gospel of wealth. But their weak point is that they are upper middle class, they're well educated, very religious usually. They thought they had the right answer. Many times they are not asking the poor, what do you need in your life? They are telling the poor, this is what you need. We all know this. We all have experience with this. This happens in politics on a regular basis. This happens with government agencies on a regular basis. All of you have had experience with educational systems. I've had long experience with that, and any teacher will tell you we are sick and tired of administrators telling us, hey, try this brilliant idea. You come and teach a class of seventh graders for a month and then tell me your brilliant idea on how you're going to solve all my problems. Because it's really solutions coming from above. They don't always ask the poor and the people who need help what their best solution is. There are exceptions to this. Jane Addams was one, but most of them are not living in the ghettos. They're living in pretty wealthy areas. This is a problem with politics today. Very few politicians today are poor starting out. Kind of can't be with the cost of politics. So again, how do they know what the average person lives like and needs? Okay. The why there, of course, is you have mass production, you have industrialization, you have monopolies, you have very large companies run by people with huge amounts of power, including the banks, and workers are largely helpless and powerless. Another aspect of this is how do you solve problems? You bring in, this is the rise of experts and scientific training. Science is a big thing around 1900. We call it today social engineering, engineering society. The idea, of course, is if you fix the environment, people will be better off. People will change if you solve the problems in their environment, their work, their living, whatever. Okay? This is the rise of new fields like economics, like social workers, like psychology, public administrations, whole new professions come out of the progressive movement. So there's some very good things that come out of this movement. Many of you are, planning to be sociology or psychology majors. The how, the different types. Slide 13, you can break it up into a couple of big categories. Remember, their goal is to fix the problem through government action, either on the city level, the state level, and also on the national level. So, Jacob Riis exposes the problems in the slums. Many of these slum tenements were owned by churches who had no idea. They were collecting the rents and had no idea what the conditions were on the ground. You have people involved with child labor. There were children as young as 5 and 6 who were working in factories, who were working in industries for about a dime a day. So clearly some problems there. Prisons, hospitals, safety at work, factory safety, factory hours, the social problems, the problems in work and living conditions. Their solution basically was more laws. Pass regulations, have minimum standards, send in inspectors to fix the problems. We do this today. We have city inspectors, which is why when you rent an apartment in Austin, you know that at least it comes up to code because we have people who go around and check this. Mostly comes up to code. Sometimes it doesn't.